Richard, welcome to Talk Satellite.
Well,
Talk Satellite.
happy to be here.
Yeah, it feels like old times, and and thank you for coming along today. So recently we experienced some discourse, if you like, surrounding the administration's approach to the traffic coordination system for space. What's your take on that, and how's it all playing out, all developing?
Well, it's a little confusing at the moment, to be perfectly honest. Just for the listeners' sort of historical reference, the first Trump administration did a pretty elaborate interagency process and drafted what they called Space Policy Directive 3 or SPD 3. And that directive said that it was timely to move space situational awareness or space tracking from the Defense Department to the Commerce Department for two reasons. One was to acknowledge the vibrant nature of the commercial satellite industry and their evolving needs, but also to acknowledge that DoD wanted to be free of this responsibility because they more interest and concern in their national security mission in space and felt like this obligation, particularly as their responsibilities had expanded internationally, that this obligation was one that they didn't want to continue into the future. So the policy directive said, okay, go to the Commerce Department. There was some back and forth. It took a while for the Congress to get comfortable with this and to fund the program. They finally funded the program in 2023, and the program was being implemented at the Commerce Department. Well, the new Trump administration came in, and one of the first things they did was to rescind the budget that had already been allocated, or at least a portion of the budget that had already been allocated, and then suggested that they were going to zero out the program and turn it over to the private sector. So again, it's unclear what all of those words taken together would mean. Let's start with the end and go forward. Turning it over to the private sector. There are certainly companies in the United States and around the world that do space situational awareness. Some of them are very capable, but there's no such thing as a certification process or any kind of government endorsement which would allow you to work transnationally or, quite frankly, even domestically. So the question of what it would mean to turn it over to the private sector is unclear. Also, because currently the United States and Europe and others are giving away SSA information for free, it would be unclear what it would mean to turn such a thing over to the private sector. More recently, in a executive order released in December, the only modification, there was a number of things that were said in that executive order about the U.S. space program, but on this issue, the one thing they said is that they would change the language to allow for charging for SSA. But again, massively uncertain who would be charging and who would be charged. In the government charging, or is this going back to the August executive order? Are they anticipating that the commercial sector would be charging? And if so, there's just no structure for that. And there's no regulation, there's no congressional regulation that would require that. And then not that this is controlling, but it's important to note that the current international environment is pretty much based on, say, as an important tool for maintaining sustainability and not really as a commercial opportunity. So there is a disconnect between where I think this last executive order might want to go and the world in more broadly. Again, Congress hasn't spoken definitively on this. The administration hasn't directly addressed any of these issues. So to give them the benefit of the doubt, I would say that we'd have to regard this as very much of a work in progress. And I expect the next formal thing we will see will be when the Trump administration puts out their 2027 budget, whether they keep the Department of Commerce SSA program or whether they try to eliminate it. If they eliminate it, what, if anything, do they intend to put in its place? all these things are incredibly uncertain at the moment.
Yeah, some very good points there, and such an important sector going forward. So would you say that the US has almost reached an industrial inflection point? A single company outstrips competitors in cost, cadence, in integration, and scale across loans, broadband and ISR.
I probably wouldn't go that far. I assume you're referring to SpaceX. They have dramatically outperformed most other players in the marketplace, both in their launch products and in their satellite communication product, the Starlink product. But, when we look back across history, we can see periods where companies do achieve amazing market penetration. I'm thinking maybe of Apple in the early 90s or Microsoft in the 80s. So we see these periods where one company seeks to really control the marketplace, and primarily by offering a far superior product to that which has existed in the past. I think that the government's response to this is always instructive. I think the U.S. government has made it clear that they need a multiplicity of launch sources, for example. And I think you're started to see the U.S. government take some action. So long term, am I concerned? No, I'm not concerned. I think that there is probably a market imbalance right now. I'm not convinced that the market can't rebalance over time. We do see a number of companies who are offering alternatives to the SpaceX products, probably most immediately the Amazon Kuiper, now referred to as LEO. The Amazon LEO product will be a comparable product to Starlink. And there are a number of launch companies, including Blue Origin and Rocket Labs and Firefly and others, who are making rapid progress in the launch area. So I think certainly we had a period where it looked like SpaceX had an uncontestable lead. But I think the great thing about the robust economy that we live in and the great passion we have both here in the US and Europe and in Japan and other places around the world, that this technology is one that excites people, and it draws incredible amounts of investment and attention globally. So I think we will see a robust competition forming in the future.
Yeah, so the Department of Defense is embracing speed and adaptability, if you like. However, unlocking private sector value requires clear structures, agile funding, and open architectures and so forth. Where are we at, and what further measures would be beneficial?
Well, I think when you look at the role, this is often sort of tossed in under the very large headline the use of commercial assets or the use of commercial products. I always like to point out that the word commercial means a lot of things. On the one hand, we have the normal marketplace where buyers and sellers engage in arm's length transactions with full information about the market and its dynamics. And, you see that in things like cell phones and laptop computers and a lot of other domestic goods. What we're talking about here when we use the word commercial is really a unique form of government procurement. And that is happening both in the civil space side in the U.S. with NASA, but also around the world, and in the national security space side, again, led by the U.S., but also around the world, where you're seeing countries saying the traditional way that we have spent government dollars, the way we have procured, the traditional methods aren't fast enough. They don't ensure robust enough supply chains and markets. And we want to go faster. We want more innovative products. And so really what you look at is when you have the incredibly large, literally hundreds of billions of dollars of budgets that are projected to be spent in space, that is a tremendous incentive for both commercial investment and commercial innovation. And I think it's what DoD and others around the world are trying to tap into is how do we tap into that more rapidly moving, innovative sector than might have been regarded as a traditional prime contractors in the aerospace area. So I think that dynamic is one that DoD is pursuing. And I think that I was re-looking at some of the older space policies, and you start to see hints of this stuff as far back as the Clinton administration. More recently, I think it has taken on tremendous momentum. The Obama administration embraced commercial solutions in a number of areas, and I know both the first Trump administration and this Trump administration, of course, has really doubled down on this and sought to make better use of this. That having been said, it as your question points out, there isn't always perfect alignment with what the national security apparatus wants and the commercial sector is capable of producing. So as you move from the sort of commonplace like satellite communications to the exquisite, where you're having unique national security capabilities, where the requirements reflect unique national security capabilities, that mismatch can start to grow more broadly. I think we're seeing a lot of froth in the marketplace surrounding the issue of the commercial provision of things associated with the Golden Dome project. And I think that there will be a slight disconnect there, as some of the requirements of that system will go well beyond what is ever needed in the commercial marketplace. And I think we'll just have to see how that all sorts itself out.
More broadly, satellite services are reshaping America's economic and civil landscape, such as emergency services, precision agriculture, fisheries, maritime, and critical infrastructure. Good times to be working on the government side, yeah?
Oh yeah, from the government side, it's a actual cornucopia of new space capabilities and assets available to the government. Many of them funded by not government dollars, but by private sector investment dollars. Again, over time, do actually need commercial markets to develop to support and the dynamism in the marketplace that we see today. If the government remains the only customer, that will eventually exert a downward pressure on all of that investment and all of that development. We have today a situation where the one truly commercial, if we use the rather arbitrary definition that truly commercial means the market could survive without the government presence in it, and I realize that's kind of an arbitrary definition, but if you use that definition, the one truly commercial industry that we have today is satellite communications, which has been vibrant for over 60 years. So we have some great progress being made in Earth remote sensing technologies, and the non-government markets for those things are growing, but the government markets continue to dominate. And we have a new generation of concepts like commercial low Earth orbit destinations, private space stations, if you will, where today the demand is almost exclusively governments, and there's a great hope and some reasons for optimism to expect those markets to grow in the future. But right now, those markets are totally dominated by government spending. So it's a very curious dynamic out there in the commercial space.
The space industry is more and more being affected by geopolitics.
I think as we look back in history, the conflict between nations, geopolitical tensions, have really been defining in the space industry. We obviously started with a long and protracted conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, which was really helped to define some of the early both governance structures and technologies which we introduced in the beginning of the space age. And so I think what we see now is a different world, more of a multipolar world rather than a bipolar world, a world where Europe and the United States and China and Russia and India and other countries are all vying for some sort of primacy in space. The complexity of the international geopolitical environment is making it very difficult to understand what the future of governance will be. If we go back 100 years and look at how the aviation industry was born, starting out in the dramatic increase in new technologies in the 90s and 1930s, and the role that those technologies eventually ended up playing in the Second World War and in armed conflict. I think we can see some early parallels between where we were then 100 years ago in aviation and where we're and the world that we're looking at in space now. Back then, because of the geopolitical environment, the United States could play a unitary governance role. And of course, they called the 1944 Chicago Convention. The war was still raging in both Europe and in the Pacific, and they got together with 52 countries and decided on the creation of the International Civil Aviation Organization, which led to the fundamental rules which govern aviation through today. Still, obviously, hundreds of billions of dollars of industry. And I think as we look at the fractured environment that we're in now, it's hard to imagine that there would be such a single focused event like the Chicago Convention to help us with manage our global space industry and our global space governance challenges. So I think we are in a very different place today. However, when we look forward to the future, we know we will need new rules for how we manage the space environment, for how we allocate resources, and particularly as we expand our reach from a low Earth orbit to the surface of the moon. There are many, many unresolved issues that no individual country will be able to simply declare the rules, and we will have to come up with some kind of collaborative mechanism for having these international discussions. And obviously, going forward, some of the more immediate conflicts were likely to be between the United States and its space ambitions and China, which has a dramatically expanding capabilities and aspirations for global leadership.
Lots of rhetoric in the US space affairs. Is now the time to deliver on all this talk?
Well, I think we're going to see the last Trump executive order, the Trump administration's executive order on, I think it was called space superiority, does define a number of very specific goals. Return to the moon by 2028, the ability to deploy a nuclear power source to the moon. And there are a number of specific dates in that order. And so the question now is can the administration get alignment with the U.S. Congress, which of course has to fund all of these. We have a new NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, who will be responsible for implementing these directives. He's new to the job, literally, I think, by a couple of weeks. And globally, the United States will need the collaboration of others, including Europe and Japan and others. And so there's a tremendous amount of work to be done to implement those objectives, and we'll just have to wait and see how that all sorts itself out.
Okay, so much happening in the Earth observation arena. How best can these systems, serve government and industry alike?
It's been a remarkable process and a remarkable growth in the number of companies who are offering unique vantage points to view the Earth in different new mechanisms for viewing the Earth. Again, aligning those with both national security and commercial objectives is a long and difficult process. Businesses. So obviously the magic will be to find new areas where the demand for these products can find real, true commercial and long and sustained demand for those new and innovative projects, whether that be in monitoring of the oceans, new environmental technologies, city planning, agriculture. There's a range of applications unfolding. We're also seeing the market change in its demand from people who are looking for images to people who are looking for various sources of data as new tools, artificial intelligence and machine learning, dealing These are massive data sets that we are producing, and these new tools are uniquely able to turn this great flood of data into usable information. So I believe we're at an inflection point here, and I believe that the value of these many companies and technologies will be greatly augmented when we do that more complete transition to their use, the transition from here's an amazing image of the Earth to here's some incredibly valuable data which you can use in your business or application.
So, Richard, is there anything else you would like to talk about? Is there anything else we can add? Or
No, I just would like to say that the amazing thing about this space story is that it keeps changing. We are at a dramatic point now where we introduced new space technologies across a range of industries. We have a dramatically changing international environment, and the concept of conflict in space is probably more clearly before us than it's ever been. At the same time, we're also on the frontier of actually really moving out to the moon and establishing permanent bases on the moon. That comes with a tremendous amount of potential conflict and challenges, how we allocate resources, fundamental issues of security, safety, equity. All of these are we're moving at a dramatic pace. We don't today have the international institutions to manage the dramatic changes that are going on. And so we have the dual challenge of creating and inventing and applying these technologies at the same time we are trying to have an international conversation about how to manage the technologies that we've developed. So I believe, I've been in this business a long time, and I believe that this is the most interesting time in the history of the space industry. So if you're around and part of this now, you should consider yourself lucky. These are the most exciting days of the space program.
wonderful. Thank you very much, Richard. It's wonderful to listen to you. And I agree. I think what's about to happen will be fantastic to be part of. It'd be fabulous. So thank you very much, Richard, for coming along today and talking to our followers. And we look forward to speaking to you again sometime in the future.
I enjoyed it and look forward to our next engagement. Thanks a bunch.